talk about this is sort of an extension of last week's topic of gamer psychology, but in sort of a different way, where we talk about common pitfalls that players can sort of fall prey to. Really, the problems that you might run into in general across multiple games. So to begin with,
one of the more notable things that people run into in especially more complex games is missing more clear paths to victory. And this is the sort of thing that happens in an instance where a game has multiple ways, multiple very viable strategies to get to the end of the game and be the winner at the end of the game. But all of these are difficult. It's difficult to judge which one of these might be correct. And this is often a bigger problem the first time you play through a game, or in the earlier stages you play through a game. What game that is this comes up in a lot is this game here, Cyclades, wherein you control an empire in the island nations of ancient Greece, trying to construct a series of metropoli. And there are many ways to do this. You can do this by building buildings. You can do this by getting philosopher cards, which essentially is a very different way of going about the same goal. You can do this militarily. You can do this by essentially turtling. There are just so many different ways to get your goals accomplished. It's difficult to say. It's difficult to say that not only that one is better than the other, but it's difficult to say which one is better at a given time.
You also have different paths to victory, not only in the way you accomplish a single goal, but there are games where you have different paths and different goals. For instance, a game like Tribute, another classic game, you can win through completing a certain number of objectives. Every time you play, there'll be a different objective card, and you must complete so many of these objectives in order to win. So you have to decide, in that case, which objectives to pursue and which ones not to. So in that case, we're unlike Cyclades here, where you're looking at different ways to achieve the same goal of 2 metropoli. In Tribune, you're looking at different different goals to fulfill in order to win. And in both, I think people sort of ignore certain ones. There are certain paths that don't get taken often enough, or that, for instance, in Cyclades, last time I played it, nobody was going for philosophers. So I decided I would do that, because if no one's going to contest philosophers, I get an advantage. I can more easily build up my philosopher base, I can more easily train them in for metropoli. So I think it's important to remember that you shouldn't necessarily go for the path that you usually go for, or one that you just prefer. While I might have preferred to focus on Ares and go military, it was more beneficial in that game state to go philosophers. So I think it's important to remember that these are all open to you, and you shouldn't ignore any one. I mean, the game should dictate which path you take, not a personal preference or a certain play style that you conform to.
Right, and that's a very easy way to miss a very simple win. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, there's also
with Race is another example. For Race the Galaxy, there are different colors you can pursue. Each of the colors works a little bit differently. Some of them are more prone to production consumption cycles than others. I really like green, so if I see a lot of green in my hand, I'm going to go for it. I have a tendency to go green. But at the same time, if I see a lot of blue, I have to know, okay, let the hand dictate my plays. Don't go green, don't try to force it.
Right, and Race is a good example of that, because it's a game with a tremendous amount of complexity. It's very easy to bypass good cards, but just because either you're not paying close enough attention, or because you have a predisposition to go a different direction. Another thing that shows up very often in games, especially Race for the Galaxy, which you just mentioned, is not paying attention to the kind of moves your other players are making. There's especially in multiplayer games. This comes up in two-player games as well. In multiplayer games, it is often very important to know exactly how your other players are playing, what strategies they're employing, and what you can do to counter those strategies, most importantly. It is very common, however, to get very wrapped up in what you're doing, to not pay too much attention, to not see what they're doing to combat your strategy, and to end up in a very oh no, oops moment, wherein everything you were trying to do sort of collapses to the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's often not that players' own strategies fail, so much as they miss how quickly somebody else is establishing their foothold. I mean, it's very common to see, all of a sudden a player has a dominant position and no one realized it. No one realized it until too late that they had taken a position that you can't get around. And I think it comes up missing. It's very subtle in race. I mean, you don't have that as much in race. That issue is not as big. But with race, it separates the good players from the great players. If you can tell what your opponents are doing and how you can sort of jump on board with them and how you can benefit from the plays they're making and make them work to your advantage. You can sort of watch what phases they choose, and if you can foresee that, you can get a benefit from their phase in addition to a benefit from your own phase.
Another example of this would be Fairy Tale, which we just talked about last week. A game that, as we mentioned, very much encourages the hate draft. If you're paying attention to what the other players are doing, you can then take their cards away. The cards that they need, they don't get. The points, the combos they be making don't ever go off, and if you're paying attention to their strategies, you can very effectively shut down other people's plays. And it's similar to what we mentioned. This doesn't come up very much with new players because it just doesn't. It's not an intuitive thing to take cards that you don't want and aren't good for you, but host somebody else.
And new players can sort of fall prey to intimidation. I mean, a new player can often miss what other players are doing or not pay enough attention to it because they're too concerned about making bad plays themselves. They're so focused on not screwing up that they don't think about what other people are doing and what they really could be doing. And so if you get intimidated, if you let another more experienced player really sort of dominate the game and you let him dictate how you play, you're not going to perform very well. So I mean, it's especially important if you're playing a game you're not very familiar with. I mean, it might not be best to necessarily mirror an opponent, but you should definitely be cognizant of what they're up to.
Absolutely. Oh, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think this wraps up today's Players Corner.
All right, we'll be back shortly here with a tutorial on how to play Small World.